Valeria, as I understand, you were involved with the Global Gateway project. That's EU's project for, among the other things, developing the infrastructure and with the internationally for the European Union, and Central Asia is a part of it. At the last summit in Samarkand, I think EU announced a $10 billion budget for within this global gateway thing. How do you think? Well, I mean, what happened now in Novorossiysk just stresses out a huge importance for diversifying the infrastructure. So, would be interesting to see how would you see the current situation, how it would happen, would it be any effect within this global gateway project, and what should be the European reaction really?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. First of all, I think this really underscores the relevance of the strategic partnership that the EU has with Central Asia beyond the framework of the Global Gateway. And in the Global Gateway, we saw how the EU sees Central Asia and Kazakhstan really as relevant partners to achieve strategic autonomy, strategic interdependence, that are concepts that are very important for Kazakhstan as well. And on the Global Gateway, I wanted to point out how relevant it is through the different projects that the EU has been launching in Kazakhstan, and not only in the whole region, and how the Black Sea is an extremely relevant geopolitical place. So at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, we are currently looking at 3 projects working both on hard infrastructure through transport and soft connectivity through digital and energy. So my very brief point is that I really see the relevance of the strategic partnership, and we hope that from the EU side and from Central Asia side, this will only improve.
Thank you. So, Kate, would you think what could be the options for securing the Ukrainian government said that it treats this port of oil as legitimate. Do you think European Union could make some statements or make any actions to secure its imports of oil from which is actually Kazakh oil to Europe? Could there be anything more than just the statements?
Yeah, I think for the European Union specifically, when it comes to responding to different international crises across the board, it's quite challenging to have stronger responses beyond statements. This is also down to the sort of foreign policy machinery of Europe, and how sometimes having stronger, more hardline positions and stronger responses is just more difficult in general. But specifically on this, as Valeria had said, there's certain interests to balance the interests of this sort of supporting Ukraine unconditionally because of Ukrainian accession is on the horizon to the European Union, but also at the same time trying to balance that with the dependencies on Kazakh oil. I definitely think there should be a stronger diplomatic stance, considering how important Central Asia and Kazakhstan is for Europe's not only energy but partnerships more broadly, and to sort of respond in a way that is sort of acknowledging that this act is not in line with international law. Specifically, it's Article 1 of the UN. No, it's Article 156 of the international humanitarian law about not attacking civilian infrastructure. And I suppose the EU has faced criticism, especially in the last 2 years, about adherence to international law, specifically on Gaza and the Middle East. So I think without a sort of stronger response, there's definitely a very valid criticism of double standards. So in my view, it's very important that the EU have a sort of response to this rather than a non-response, and really engage with Kazakh interlocutors about how to support a reconstruction of the facility, or B, figure out some other alternative for energy, the energy transport infrastructure. But sort of overall, I think what we will expect as a sort of perhaps a statement from the EU more broadly. So I don't think there will be a specific response that would be needed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think also this should serve as an impetus for the EU to take more urgency in helping Central Asia and the South Caucasus get rid of these dependencies, like the fact that, you know, it's grown to 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports now, right, being handled through Novorossiysk. I think the EU realizes what a valuable partner Kazakhstan is and will be in the future. So I think even if Ukraine were pressured to reduce the targeting of these attacks, the reality is that this conflict is unlikely to go away for a long time, and this region, particularly the North Black Sea, will still be full of security risks and potential attacks like this in the future. I think it's very unpredictable.
Well, Livia, can I maybe a little bit transform the question into, well, this case shows as the some of the oil might be diverted in the whole project of Global Gateway, closely connects Central Asia with South Caucasus, which just Vlad also mentioned now. So how would you say, how viable is it, and how does the European Union would see that these regions, two regions, should be more closely interrelated and connected as one-way policy for the European Union, because it involves the transport, it involves the security. As we have seen, there are two things that, for example, the termination and the peace agreement, the termination of one peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and providing this new Trump corridor, or called trip corridor via Armenia, and Kazakhstan at the latest meeting of Turkic organizations, countries in Uzbekistan, it was agreed that Azerbaijan will be a full-fledged member of the C5 organization. Now it's basically C6. So what's your view in terms of that these two regions should be viewed as a common one?
Well, I maybe struggle to answer that, because I believe maybe the answer shouldn't come from the EU side in this sense, because I believe as to try to build as inclusive and as fair partnership as we can. I think the answer would probably need to come from the South Caucasian and the Central Asian region in this sense. Because it is about listening to partners, and I think the EU has a history of maybe not listening too carefully to its partners. So in this sense, I would like to hear your views. And on the EU side, as I can answer, I believe at the moment the EU is trying to diversify its partnership and to maybe move towards a multi-alignment policy. And in this sense, it could be interesting to see the two region brought together in a framework. But yeah, I would be interested in listening more.
I see. But in your view, do you see Central Asia still being hugely influenced by Russia and China? And do you think this influence has increased over the last 3 years?
Well, I think that the accident right now does bring out some issues on Russian reliance for Kazakhstan, because this is a huge port and a huge system that is shared with Russia. And I believe that the effects will show how interdependence can be dangerous for all countries and for all partnerships. And for regards with China, I believe that the use of the Belt and Road Initiative has been quite heavy on the Central Asia region for obvious geopolitical reason. So as many other countries and as many other regions, I believe Central Asia is relying on foreign actors, and the world is moving towards a more strategic autonomy, which is a term that we maybe use a bit too much in Brussels, but it's moving toward a strategic autonomy framework. So I believe the influence might be very relevant in this context.
Kate, now the question is for you. I mean, how do you think the cooperation among Central Asian countries is largely declarative when we see, okay, we see these C5 meetings taking place, C5 plus United States, EU, and the others, but there is still a certain, contradictions between these countries. They have sometimes or very often different agendas. So do you think this consolidated position is mostly declarative, or there is really something behind that can unite the region? So rather going with competition, they could be all together.
Yeah, so I think there's this sort of, from a sort of more European perspective, there's this sort of impulse to paint all countries in Central Asia under the one brush. And you often see that in Brussels, where talking about the region, it's just the region rather than the specific countries or the specific policies. Like Turkmenistan is far, far different from Kazakhstan, specifically when it comes to Kazakhstan's economy in the last few years. And I think there was a Goldman Sachs report that Kazakhstan's economy is really on such a launching pad at the moment, and one of the top to watch in the world. So I think there's this idea to kind of equate all of the countries at the same time, but it's not really possible, or it's not really constructive. So when it comes to cooperation in the region, I mean, I personally wouldn't have the answers, but more from the European summitry side of things. I think it's really important for different EU countries as well as the EU specifically to develop relations individually, but also with the region. Like the summit we saw in last April in Uzbekistan, that was a really sort of positive step towards EU Central Asian relations more broadly. But this is sort of veering away a little bit from regional cooperation more to the cooperation with Europe. But I think it's quite positive that we've seen Europe engaging a lot more in the region, and how, over the last 30 years, I think Central Asia for Europe has been a bit more, let's say, not top of the political agenda and seen more of periphery view and as the Eastern neighborhood. But since the invasion in 2022, this has really thrown how Europe engages with partners into sharp focus, and why it's so important to engage with partners in a deeper level rather than sort of the surface level diplomatic relations. So we're sort of seeing this shift from seeing Central Asia and Kazakhstan specifically as a corridor more to a strategic hub, and which I think is a positive thing. And to have more engagement, like Valeria had said, through the Global Gateway specifically. But on regional cooperation, I suppose I would be interested to hear your view as well, to learn more about it, because
Okay, but you said it's really that it changed after the start of the war, the European stance, but do you think it still at the necessary level now, or it should be more active, or it's already adequate? What?
Well, I think it's on a path at the moment rather than being adequate, because in the past, sort of since 1991, European engagement has sort of only been through a lens of development cooperation, energy projects, and let's say some security concerns with Afghanistan. So that's sort of the framework of which it was for a long time, and there's not been super intense amount of engagement. But specifically since the war, I think Europe's kind of understanding of the rest of the world and itself has had a bit of a shift, and this sort of post-Cold War logic has shifted entirely, and Europe is sort of waking up more to realize the importance of not only the partnership but deeper diplomatic engagement with Central Asia. And I mean, as it stands, there's like I said, the summits, the Global Gateway projects, and greater diversification on energy. I mean, in my view, it doesn't go far enough. I think there's a lot more that could be done. And I mean, we've seen a lot of OSCE engagement with Central Asia, but I mean, at the moment, the OSCE is, as an organization, going through a lot of trouble, specifically when it comes to making any decisions are completely blocked by Russia. So I think there's a sort of space to be filled there by the EU when it comes to regional engagement, but and because a lot of OSCE activities have been, let's say, on hold, and there is a lot of potential for a sort of further security architecture and really involving Central Asia and Europe in a sort of bridge, let's say. Yeah.
Mr. Paddock, so same question basically. As we see Central Asia, I mean, there is a shift of interest from European Union. On the same time, what we see has been happening. China has launched its Belt and Road project 10 years ago from Astana, from Kazakhstan, and we see definite results with the China becoming the #1 trade partner for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, two of these countries forming 80% of regional GDP. And we see Turkey actively progressing with the Turkic Union organization. It already shifted to the organization level, and there are more advance and room and perspective they see with even cooperation in terms of common security, especially between Azerbaijan and Turkey, and there are joint exercises planned next year by the Central Asian countries and the Azerbaijan. We see Russia also traditionally trying to preserve its influence over the region. And now we see, after the last meeting of C5 plus Trump, that the United States will actively get involved with the rare earth project, minerals and sales and etc. So they see it as a kind of necessary of American interest. So the question would be, how would you see the European stance within this competitive arena in Central Asia? I mean, same question, do you see it's enough? Do you see it as a wait and see and this is justified, or it should be more active?
So I think there's some tensions in the drivers of EU policy towards Central Asia after the war. On the one hand, there is, like Kate mentioned, this reawakening, let's call it a strategic reawakening, where the economic consequences of the war made Europe realize that it needs to seek out alternative partners, and Central Asia and the South Caucasus are naturally one of the most promising avenues. So there is certainly that drive, but at the same time, I think there is maybe a little bit of hesitation on some areas with regards to, for example, the way that the war showed that Central Asia still maintains close relations with Russia, and while condemning and opposing the war in Ukraine, essentially maintains a non-alignment policy. This may create some hesitation from the EU standpoint. I'm not sure I would be the best to confirm that, but I think that some policymakers will see this, as putting some distance in how much cooperation can be achieved, because if you look, for example, at some of the prospective EU member countries like Georgia, then the EU expects them to implement the same sanctions regime that the EU has on Russia. So there is that distance, but I would say on the EU versus the other actors, I mean, the key similarity of Russia, China, Turkey, and today the United States is that they both have very centralized personalist, they all have very centralized personalist regimes, which allows them to make decisions very quickly and enter these markets, sign new deals, and essentially push, whatever the decided agenda is. That contrasts with the EU, which is, of course, a lot more about consensus and decision-making and is more bureaucratic. So fundamentally, it has been a lot slower at engaging with these actors. But I wouldn't characterize this necessarily as a wait-and-see, adopting a wait-and-see approach, but rather as just the structural limitations of how quickly the EU can actually move as a collective entity. But then you have independent, I mean, separate EU members who are pursuing their own and more rapid cooperation agendas with Central Asia. I think if you look, for example, at the Black Sea states, so Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and even Serbia, they've been pursuing at a lot faster rate the energy partnerships with with Azerbaijan, with Georgia, with Central Asia. And fundamentally, it's because they are under much more pressure, right? So their energy markets are a lot more vulnerable than, say, you know, Portugal or Iceland. So you will always have this bigger push from some members than others to engage. And I think those forums within the EU, like the Black Sea one, would probably be the most promising to engage with. To begin with, and then over time it will build into a kind of more broad partnership. That's kind of what I would expect.
Thank you, Vlad. Valeria, what's your view, really? Do you think it's adequate? Should there be any reconsideration within the global gateway framework? Or
I think I'm struggling a bit. The Global Gateway is still at the initial stage, in the sense that it was launched around 4 years ago. And while it seems like a long time, it has taken quite a bit of time for it to actually launch and to start building and to start making some changes. And I really see that right now we're talking about an investment hub. We're talking about actually put it in practice. So I wouldn't evaluate the Global Gateway for how it is now, but I would give it a couple more years.
Okay, and maybe the last question, generally, how do you perceive, Valeria, the information about Central Asia by the European Union, by EU, by leaders, by think tanks like your institution? Is it enough what you receive? Do you wish it could be more? And if so, in what areas would you like to get? Because communication is really important, I think.
Yeah, thank you for this question, because I believe it's quite interesting, and we had a discussion even before joining the call about this. And I believe that the stance maybe that we have at BIC is that we do not receive enough information, and that mostly information that we receive does arrive to us in English, translated from certain actors. And in this sense, that's also why I wanted to connect to my previous answer, that I would be more interested in learning and hearing from your side. And in that sense, I want to thank you all for organizing this call, because I believe it's exactly what we need. It's a way to connect different think tanks and different knowledge. So I definitely believe we should have more information, and even the research to join this call was extremely interesting. And we definitely have to learn more about all of the countries in Central Asia, but Kazakhstan in particular.
Kate, any information you miss or would like to have more on the regional affairs here?
Yes, I agree with Valeria. It's an excellent question. And often in Brussels, we have a very sort of Eurocentric view of the world, and especially in the news circles and the press. So often Kazakhstan and Central Asia is sort of less of a focus, but it is definitely interesting to engage with. We've engaged with some the embassy here in Brussels, the Kazakhstan mission to the EU and NATO, which has been very interesting. But I would say the information that I'm quite interested in would be the domestic landscape and the domestic political landscape, and to sort of hear more about that, which I feel like oftentimes international media doesn't cover. And it's more the sort of bigger picture news, like the Ukrainian attack, of course, which is high relevance. But I think it's the more economic matters and domestic political affairs is something I would be much interested in learning more about, which I feel often Western media has less of a focus on. And yeah, I think that would be very interesting to hear more information about.
Okay. Vlad, I think you don't have any, I mean, part of the problem could be the language. Mostly the media here, they are in local or Russian language, and Vlad, you don't have this problem. But still, how would you assess the information supply from 1% to 100, let's say? I mean, that's really important. I would say tectonic changes going on here. In terms of internal ones, I think we have very important parliamentary elections in Kyrgyzstan, which are showing where the direction it goes to, basically, and then there will be the presidential election, which is foreseeable. But again, these parliamentary elections would be showing the trend. So, Vlad, how would you assess from 1 to 100? You have enough information in English, and which areas could be this in?
Yeah, I would say it varies a lot depending on the country we're talking about. You know, in some cases, I think economic data or commercial data may be more difficult to find. I'm just thinking of a recent study I was doing on Tajikistan, where, you know, company registers and so on are maybe difficult to find if we're not talking about big players. But I would mainly agree with what Kate said about having more analysis from local experts about the political dynamics, and understanding that certain issues may be very sensitive, of course, to the degree that this is possible. It would be great to have more of that. And I think definitely in English, like you said, there is a lot more available in Russian. And I think also it would be... I'm a bit worried that in the global discourse, Central Asia is being caught up in this critical minerals and the whole energy competition, which on the one hand brings new attention, but on the other hand, you know, it's the way that other actors look at it as a region of opportunity, but also to extract resources. So I think to avoid this kind of over-dependency where you just have foreign actors coming in and aggressively trying to buy up the resources, which often comes at a great environmental cost and economic cost, we need to hear more of the visions that local experts have for Central Asia's development model. That's what I would say. So that it isn't us imagining what is the most profitable way, but rather, you know, what is actually the most beneficial.
Okay. Thank you very much, dear all. It was very interesting to hear your views. Really, as I said, this is our first try. I hope it will become regular. If you are, thank you again for your initial interest. We hope it will be sustained. We will be gladly sending you invitations for the next ones so that we could really close this gap of information, inviting the experts, making these exchange views. The next one we are planning following this EU top-level visit to our region. And if there are any issues you would like to learn about local developments, we can also consolidate the local experts who could really give also additional information that you could assess as well towards what's happening here, whether that's Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, or Azerbaijan. So the last one we had also was with the Armenian and Georgian experts. So, that's our idea, what we're gonna do. And thank you very much.